Okay, so this is for question 4 part E, the OEQ for question 4 part E. The question itself, okay, is excessive food consumption is a more serious threat to individuals than it is to countries. How far do you agree with the statement? Use examples to support your answer. So what you should have dealt with is, of course, focusing on excessive food consumption. What are the impacts on individuals versus what are the impacts on countries? And then conclusion, your comparative assessment paragraph, your evaluation would be on the scale of impact of these this item here, excessive consumption of food on these two groups that we are looking at. So once again, take a look at this question, this candidate's answer here. I'm going to use this as a guide. So she very correctly starts with one of the threats of excessive, okay, note excess instead of excessive, food consumption is to countries is slower economic growth. So then she goes on about how does this come about, okay, focusing on when you have excessive consumption, there is a tendency for people to become obese, right, with high BMI, right, more likely to fall sick. And as a result, what happens to people who fall sick? Okay, so I think it's a fair attempt. The first 3-4 sentences here, where she actually goes on to talk about productivity decrease because of the person not being healthy and not being in good physical shape. Okay, falling sick here. So then she goes on and talks about people are less productive, work need to be done, then result in slower economic growth, so excessive. Then she goes on to talk about children. But before we go on to the children component here, right, one thing to highlight, I've written down here, is you need to be very clear when you're talking about this, because you are talking about slower economic impact as in terms of the country itself. So you need to have a clear link. So what if the person is sick? So what is the person's productivity drops? Okay, the person's productivity drop is at an individual level. It doesn't move on to the company itself. It doesn't move on to the economy itself, which would then explain how it impacts the country. So you need to be very clear. You cannot stop here. Your explanation needs to be complete. So this paragraph here, explanation is incomplete. Right, so straight away you know you're not going to get your full credit for this one paragraph here because explanation is already incomplete. Right, moving on, you talk about children. Okay, candidate here talks about children, which is good. Okay, falling sick, missing school, resulting in less educated people in the country. Now, less educated people, I think that is fine. If you're chosen to talk about the lowering in education level of general lowering of the education level of many individuals, that would be easier to link back to in terms of the impact on the country itself. But fine, let's see how she goes on about it. The problem now rises with the next sentence, which talks about therefore there will be less people working. Now, impact on jobs is not wrong, but you have to understand that uneducated people can still work. Okay, so what you're looking for is unable to engage in high paying jobs, okay, or high remuneration careers. So what then would the impact be on the economy if everybody is working, but everybody is working in low paying jobs because you're less educated or uneducated? Then the economy will not grow. Okay, the potential of the economy will be much limited. However, this is not what is shown here. Actually, it shows that this candidate has some sort of a misunderstanding for education level and contribution to the economy. Okay, and the consequential impact on the economy. Okay, so sometimes you need to be a bit more careful about what you've written down in your answers as your answers, because if they don't make sense, right, they could negate what you've written actually. Second paragraph here talks about excessive food consumption on individuals, okay, dealing with individuals. Moving on to obesity, and very accurately talking about the 3 related conditions with obesity: diabetes, high blood pressure, as well as this idea of blocked artery. Okay, so it's blocked arteries, right? Not blocked artery. If you're very few people are fortunate enough to only have one artery blocked. Okay, so negatively impact, right? What happens? They will negatively impact their health, and then some will die due to a heart attack. But they don't only die due to a heart attack. Of all the things you have mentioned, right, they can die of any one of them. Okay, so moving on, she gives us candidate here gives us an example. Okay, obesity reduced lifespan by 9 years. This is correct, but this is an incomplete quote of the example itself. Where did this number come from? It came from a study. So you need to tell me which university or which NGO produced this study, right, to show this specific statistic here. Okay, so this is important because this then shows you this is a very serious impact on a person. Okay, result in death of individuals. Individuals die. So death of individuals is not a big problem. It is okay. It's not that it's not a big problem. It's something that everybody faces. So what is the problem here when you bring in excessive food consumption? It is not only death, which is inevitable, but it is bringing forward, okay, shortening lifespan and bringing forward the notion of death. That is important here. So once again, second paragraph here, also not complete, right? Also not complete. So you're still more or less locked in L1. Okay, now if your OEQ would have been a bit more substantial, you had a third paragraph, you would maybe give you a better chance at passing here, right, at this point already. Now, assessment paragraph, generally able to deal with the overall idea of why one is a bit worse than the other. However, there's a conclusion portion at the bottom that doesn't seem logical. Okay, so you talk about things. Let's zoom in. Let's zoom in from this point onwards. Companies may have to close down, and that could mean hundreds and thousands of people lose their job and income. Okay, that's still fair. Since the impact on countries also affect individuals, largely agree that excessive food consumption is more serious threat to individuals. So, how is that so? Right? How is that the fact that the country impact of country also impacts individuals, so is more important for individuals? Okay, there is no clear link as to why you say so. So maybe you give a couple of examples to flesh this out. Okay, or give a couple of sentences to describe what exactly do you mean. Okay, is in terms of a criteria for comparison, right? In your evaluative paragraph, it will be good if you have one criteria and you're comparing maybe scale. Okay, or it is more intense for the country versus the individuals. The total quantum economically is greater for the country than for the individual. Or in many of your cases, you try to deal with it as in, because one leads to the other. If you have no issue at the individual level, you won't have the issue at the country level, okay, at all, right? So that is a bit harder to fully flesh out, but it's possible. There are some of you who are able to do that. So I think the issue here with your evaluative paragraph tends to be you don't clearly state what is your basis for comparison here. So if the marker has to go through the process of trying to distill what your comparison criteria is, right? Many a times, if it's not clear enough, they're not going to give it to you. Okay, so this at Cambridge level marking, very, very positive style of marking would be a L24, nothing more than L24, a bare pass. In school context, this will not be a pass. Okay, so keep this in mind. What we have talked about earlier in analyzing this particular script here, I hope you take a look at your own scripts. If you're trying to attempt this on your own, right? Do some points or writing a frame for this. Keep this in mind. The linking and the phrasing and the explanation, everything needs to be complete. You're not going to be able to stand in front of the examiner and tell them, oh, actually what I meant was this. You're not going to be able to do that. So you have to make sure that you have a very clear idea written down clearly and logically. Okay, so keep this in mind. This is for question 4E.